We're gonna make over this wood bowl. It was painted white at one time, so it's been painted, sealed, and so I just wanted some kind of fun texture because there's a crack in it and I wanna camouflage that a bit. I found this plaster wrap that's like when you break your arm and you have a cast. So you soak that in water and then we're just going to lay it on top of the wood bowl. It should stick to the wood bowl without adding any decoupage or glue or anything like that because it's like a cast medium, so it should stick there. And the only thing that I found is I left it sit in the water. If I were to do this again, I would probably just wet it and pull it out of that water because it did start to get really, really super soggy and some of that plaster was a little bit of a mess to work with. But you want to make sure that you have a bunch of wrinkles in it. That's the fun part about this, is seeing how many wrinkles you can have and how many twists and turns of that cast that you can make. So you're just going to continue to wrap this casting around this wood bowl and then let it dry. What I wanted to do is have an old Italy-like look to it, like it had been a pretty little pottery bowl and it had just been painted over a gazillion times. So I'm using the rose chintz paint inlay. It is one of my favorites. If you would like this paint inlay, it is available on my website at thepaintedphotographer.com. So in order to use this inlay is we have to paint the surface first, but what I want to do is prep the inlay so that it is the right size for my bowl. So I'm going to just temporarily put it on there and find out where I need to cut. And there are grid lines that will help you to cut a straight line. So you're just going to kind of figure out where your grid line is that you want to cut and then make that straight cut across the bottom. I didn't want my edges to be squared off, so I cut around the paint inlay image so that I wouldn't have a square look on the ends. I'm going to fill the entire bowl with this rose chintz paint inlay because I found that if I have any open spaces where the paint inlay is not touching the surface, then I'll see that when I go and give it some wax. So you're gonna watch me here. I'm going to let you see me put this entire paint inlay on to this bowl, and I cover up every surface. We're going to give this bowl one coat of vintage linen, and that is a DIY paint product that you can find on my website at thepaintedphotographer.com. It's a clay-based paint, and you want a wet surface. So I'm only painting half of this bowl, about the size of my first sheet of paint inlay, and it's going to remain wet. One of the tricks that I found is if you give your paint inlay a little squirt of water first and kind of activate that paint, it will help it adhere a little bit better. So I gave it a nice mist, and then you want to mist it after you put it on, because you're just going to push that into that wet paint, making it adhere into the surface. What it's doing is that it's actually just like a tattoo. So you're just going to, like a kid's tattoo, you're just going to put it onto the wet surface and then push it into the paint, just kind of melting the two together. So again, mist it a little bit helps to make sure that it will all adhere correctly. So I put my two full sheets on first, and then I went ahead and I took all my little scraps and I filled in the two sides so that I didn't have any open surface. So you can see I missed some of the paint right there, and you want to make sure you have wet paint under there. So I just peeled it back a little bit and stuck some paint on there and move forward. Now I'm going to fill in those little spaces, and you can watch. After that paint inlay is completely dried, it's going to be a dull surface again, and we need to wet it to take that backing paper off. So we're going to give this a nice mist and wait about 30 seconds before you start to pull off that backing paper, making sure it's all wet and moist, because what that does is it helps it to release. So giving this a little bit of time, and then we're going to start peeling back some of these papers. I'm starting with the little chunks that I put on first, and you can watch this unfold because it's a beautiful bowl. And the rose chintz paint inlay is a perfect inlay to do this process with. This paint inlay technique, along with the plaster casting, is going to give you a very distressed type of rose look, which is what I was going for. I did not want, there's some full roses and I'm okay with that, but I did not want everything to be full. I wanted it to be more of a vintage look. Now we're going to paint the inside of the bowl with a little bit of that same vintage linen and get rid of all of my fingerprints. I know that was probably driving you all crazy, me as well. So I gave that a nice coat of vintage linen, only one because I wanted to distress it back to some of that dark paint that's underneath. I use Big Top to seal this bowl. When I use Big Top, I take it from its container, I put it into a separate one. I call it Dirty Big Top because it contaminates very quickly. So if you want to dip your brush into it, make sure you separate it. And when using a paint inlay, that paint inlay is real paint. It's going to smear. So I have a technique where I can go right over top of it with Big Top, but I let this dry for 24 hours and then I barely touch my brush and I do not smooth that Big Top out. It's kind of chunky. It probably is a little thick in some areas, but it works. So now I'm going to distress this bowl back on the inside to some of that dark look that I really like, to just age this up a bit. And this bowl is becoming a piece of art. I'm using Big Top on the inside of the bowl, and it does not have a paint inlay on it, so you can, like, I'm smoothing back and forth with this Big Top and making sure I have a nice even coat. Don't do that when there's a paint inlay underneath. Now the Big Top is dry, so I can go back over and make sure I get all the areas of the bowl, and I can smooth out that Big Top because I've sealed in that paint inlay. It no longer will activate with the Big Top. From the beginning, we wanted this bowl to have an aged look to it, so I came in with the dark wax. Since I'm going over Big Top, I did not have to clear wax it because it already has a sealer on it. So I'm going in and I'm using that dark DIY wax. If you would like to purchase, it's on my website at thepaintedphotographer.com. And I just rub it right into the bowl, especially getting it in all those creases and crevices and chunks that the casting made for this bowl. It's going to look like a nice piece of pottery. And you take a dry paper towel while it's still wet and buff that back and get some of that white to come through. If it's too dark for you, you can take some clear wax and go over the top of it and it'll still bring back some of that white look. The clear wax acts like an eraser. So if it was too dark for you, because we have the Big Top underneath or a clear wax, you would be able to erase it back. Here's the final look. I hope you like it. I hope you try it. If you need any of these products, stop over to thepaintedphotographer.com and I'll ship them right to your front door.